Hello everybody, how are you? So this guy has to eventually go somewhere else, so that might happen on its own. Perfect. So welcome to this Inversions Workshop. I'm going to focus on 3 poses, but the setup that we are going to work with is a setup that we can also use for many other inversions. Now, one thing to think about is every time that you're gonna start teaching or practicing an inversion for yourself is wrists. So working on the wrists, bringing movement into the wrists and strengthening, and also the core, because the core is what is going to help you to stay up from the ground. So the core is going to help you go against gravity at the same time as the strengthening in your muscles. But something that I don't think a lot of us think about is the stacking of the bones. The bones, as you may already know, they are very strong structures. So when we are stacking the bones in the proper way or in the alignment that is more efficient for the pose, then we can do the pose in a way that is more efficient and easier for ourselves. So we're not relying so much on the strength of the muscles, which is good. Strength of the muscles is going to help the structure of the bones, but structure of the bones is something that I think we take for granted a little bit. So I'm going to get this guy to move out to the side. Yeah, it's right here. Oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a second yoga mat. Yeah. This one is for my dog. There you go, perfect. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is work on the core, and some of the things that I like to do to work on the core is shapes and positions that look like the final pose that I'm trying to do, that I'm achieving. So let's say that my first one for today is going to be crow pose. So for crow pose, what are some of the shapes that look like crow pose? So I'm going to begin with boat, and I'm going to start here. So bringing shoulders down, lengthening through the spine, and then floating both legs off the floor. Hands can be behind the thighs, but if I want to engage and activate my core a little more, then I can begin to take my arms off the legs. And because crow is all about connection of the legs into the upper arms or the triceps, then you can begin to resemble that however is available to you. So bringing knees into the upper arms as close as you can. Already I can feel my core working, and you can start to also work on the wrists by starting to bring the palms to face up toward the ceiling. So it's sort of resembling the pose as much as you can in a way that is safer for the body, so you don't have to use your hands on the floor right away. Already I feel the core here. And then you can extend the arms, extend the legs. You can begin to also add a little bit dynamic movement and do it again, just to find that core connection. So we want isometric, which is when we hold, but sometimes it's nice to also work on dynamic movement, just to get also the muscles to be a little bit more aware of movement. Things might shift, so it's not always all steady in one place. And then let's do it again. Really feeling the knees coming in. Maybe every time you bring the knees in, thinking of taking the knees even closer into your own body. And then holding here just for a couple more breaths. And then let's take a break here. Whew. So, for crow pose, another thing you can do is also do it on the floor. And I'm going to face away from you. By the way, I place my mat close to the wall just for handstand and for headstand I will do later on. And also, it's nice to remind your students to tuck your shirt under before they begin, because when you start to go into inversions, then, shirt comes out. So, another way that is nice to engage the core is to lie down on your mat, knees to chest, and for this one, the pelvis is going to come off the floor. I'm going to go a little bit closer here. So same idea, basically the same shape we did seated, but we're just going to flip the plane and change it. So belly engages, knees to arms, my pelvis comes off the floor, and I feel the core engaging. You can bring feet together or heels closer. Whatever you need to bring the knees and connect the knees into your armpits. And if you cannot hold this, you can take a break, separate the knees off the upper arms, and then bring them closer again and take a break. So you can make these dynamic by bringing the knees into your upper arms a few times, or if your core feels strong that day, you can hold it there. So I'm going to turn and show you that the pelvis is coming off the floor. Pelvis is coming off the floor and then coming back down to the floor. Arms don't have to change because you're taking the lower body to the arms. Just like normal crow pose, you're taking the lower body, resting it on the arms. The arms are the stability. So I'm going to hold it here, just 2 more breaths. And then release. And then at some point, you might want to just counter stretch and bring the hip flexors to the opposite direction. Take a few breaths here. Maybe arms to the back. So this is bridge pose with arms over the head, just to create elongation through the front of the body because we've done so much contraction in the front of the body. And then slowly starting to roll back down. Okay, so let's work a little bit on the arms because when it comes to placing support on the arms, we want to find both sukha and sthira, which is mobility and stability. And because we're going to be putting weight on the hands, that automatically also is going to passively continue to work the core. So hands on the mat, you can begin by having shoulders stacking over the wrist. So this is what I was talking about, stacking of the bones. So this is one example. When shoulders are stacked over the wrist, then the arm bones are perpendicular to the floor, straight up from the floor all the way upwards. And then by using that stacking of the bones, right now I'm not using my core too much, but you can always do things like tucking toes under and taking knees slightly off the floor. That already engages the core at the same time as helps strengthens the arms because you are also using your arms here and your muscles of the arms. But at the same time, you're also stacking the bones. So you're using the alignment of the bones, the intelligence of the bones, and the efficiency of the bones. And then that was a little bit of strength there for the core and for the wrist. Let's bring some mobility into the wrist. So you can shift back, shift forward, to the side. And this is more of an improvisation. So it's like a little dance for you. So improvising the hands here. Also, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to write them down. I'll answer them. And then once you've done this little wrist dance, you can also flip one hand and begin to have a conversation with that joint. Notice how that joint feels. You can take the fingers and bring them in. You can play with also the direction of the arm. Bones grow in spirals. So a bone is never straight from one end to the other end. A bone has a little bit of a spiral, so one end is positioned slightly different from the opposite end of that bone. So it's nice to also do a lot of spiraling with the bones and with the muscles, because that is natural of the body and the body does that naturally. So let's do the other. We're also working on joint mobility, joint stability. Don't forget about your breath. Sometimes when we activate the core, the breath starts to become shallow, which is okay, but just notice your breath changing. And we can also do this with our palms on the floor. We can have fingers facing each other, or fingers away from each other, or even toward the back space, just utilizing and playing with the spiraling of the bones. And it's also bringing awareness into what you're about to do. It's like you're preparing the body to get to a specific place, which in this case is crow pose. Now I'm going to take a break from my knees and my legs and also the wrists. So instead of putting weight on the hands, I'm just going to create or allow for the wrist to have a little bit of a dance here. You can place your palms away from each other and tops of the hands together. So it's basically doing similar things we did on the mat. And you don't have to do this whole routine always. You can choose to do versions of it. Moving into sun salutations at the beginning is a really nice way to also warm up the core and the wrists. So sun salutations before you start your inversion practice works really nicely as well to prepare for the inversions. But once you've chosen your inversion, then there is a few things that you can play with to prepare for that inversion. In my mind, it works to think that what are all the many ways that I can flip the plane and create a shape of the same pose without actually going to the full pose yet. So as I mentioned before, sitting down or lying down. Now, another thing that you can start to play with, so once you have your wrist, once you have your core awakened, you can begin by playing with different versions, again, without going into the full expression of the pose. So both feet on the floor, hands on the floor, and then here I want to focus on simply just connecting and feeling and creating that kinesthetic memory of the knees connecting into the upper arms, into the armpit area. So these already is crow pose, and I haven't even lifted my feet off the floor. but I have most of my body parts in alignment with crow pose. I'm looking slightly in front of the hands. I'm creating a bit of a triangle with the top of my side where I'm looking at and my two hands. Both hands are shoulder distance apart. Both elbows are in, so I'm creating that chicken wing connection that we have in chaturanga. And then the knees are connecting in, and I can play with keeping the feet down. I can play with lifting the heels off the floor, always keeping my focus in the same place. Let me just quickly check my time here. Oh, already 10:15. Okay. So, after we've done that, shifting, and you can stay here, you don't have to go further. Even if it's right here, even if the hands do not come all the way down to the floor, someone can begin to try this. And how low you can lower the pelvis and still stay stable and engaged. That one is actually very hard for the thighs. But still the core is being engaged here. So, or even if fingertips are on the floor and I just want to play with the alignment, but not by taking the feet off the floor, then you can play with that. So, let's try it, see what happens. And there's a few ways of doing crow pose. You can try it with both elbows micro bent. You can try it with your arms straight. I think arms straight is a bit more challenging. Maybe when you have practiced crow pose with elbows bent enough, you can begin by lengthening the elbows and the arms. So shifting, maybe one foot begins to come off the floor. Keep this integrity, so don't let the arms fall out. Keep the arms hugging in. Maybe one foot comes up, lower. Maybe the other foot comes up, lower. Maybe both feet begin to come off the floor, belly stays engaged. The awareness is on your belly and your focal point, stacking elbows over wrists. And then when you're done, again, you can bring that mobility back into the wrist, just to create a bit of space between the joints. Because it's already 10:17, let's move into handstand. Actually, I changed my mind. Let's move into headstand and then we'll do a little bit of handstand. So for headstand, one thing that I like to work with, and actually let me check if see there's any comments. I'll check on my computer. So with headstand, what I like to work with is this mobility of the shoulder. So the idea of being able to keep the integrity of the chest, because headstand is all about keeping the body straight from the crown of the head all the way down to the feet. So once you do something like this, a lot of the times what happens is that, I'm going to do it this way, a lot of the times what happens is that the chest goes out like this. That already is disturbing the alignment of the skeleton. So the idea of being able to keep the arms here, but draw the chest back in. So playing with that difference in space. So a lot of the times that we can work on that is by simply sitting or kneeling. And you can bring your hands together and begin to play. Play with how far can you take your arms without disrupting this alignment of the chest. You can also do it lying down. And it is with like straight, even better. You can use a wall to place the feet against the wall. And then find the natural curvature of your spine as you begin to bring both arms back without letting the upper body come off the floor. So it's all about playing with that. You can also play with dolphin. So with dolphin, this is also a great preparation for peacock pose. So again, being able to keep your lower ribs engaged as you continue to take the arms over the head, which is what happens in headstand. So let's do the headstand arms. So bringing one finger. So I like to also place one finger, not the pinky fingers, not one underneath the other, but just keeping them both next to each other, side by side. And then the same idea. It's like a dolphin, but just the arms are a little bit different. So keeping that connection of the spine very similar. Let me do it here. So head comes down, and then instead of like arcing or rounding the spine, is to try to keep as straight as possible. And straight as possible, just actually keeping the same curves of the spine, the natural curves of the spine, as much as possible. Even when you have the knees down, how to keep that neutral spine as much as possible. So it's not arching, it's not rounding. You can also play by walking your feet against the wall. And when you bring the feet against the wall, you want to be able to keep a distance that is straight legs against the wall. And one way to measure that is by sitting against the wall and extending both legs. So where the legs are, that is where I'm going to place my upper body. This also goes for handstands. So where my feet were, that's where I'm going to place my upper body, whether it's my head for headstand, whether it's my hands for handstand. So you can also do like a little bit of a dolphin here, making sure that your elbows are also not going to go away. So thinking of the stacking of the bones, keeping the shoulders stacking over the elbows. Belly in, maybe one leg comes out, maybe the other. And also, once you are in your headstand or in your variation with the feet against the wall, is notice this. Are the elbows sinking into the ears? And can I press my elbows away from the ears when I have all that weight? Could I even try to float the crown of the head slightly off the mat? So instead of sinking upper body into shoulders, I think I mentioned elbows, but it was shoulders. If I said elbows, I meant shoulders. So if your upper body is sinking into your shoulders, pressing the shoulders down away from the ears. And then it's nice to be able to hold this maybe for 30 seconds or 1 minute, but really keep aware, stay aware with the stacking of the spine, that you're not rounding, you're not back bending too much. Maybe you can play by having one leg off the floor, off the wall. You can play by bringing the other leg off the wall. And because we are working on this, which is the space between the hips and the legs, and we're working on that L shape, which is upside down, you can also spend some time beforehand if you feel any tightness or your spine is not responding, sit here. This opens up the back of the legs, gets the back line of the body moving, even moving into a bit of a forward fold before you actually go into the L shape. Now, when it comes to headstand, I don't recommend to swing the legs up because we're putting a lot of pressure on the neck and the head. Headstand should be those poses where instead of kicking the legs up, unless you're using the wall, to try to use the core and bring the legs slowly up. So if I am using the wall, keeping about 1 foot distance from the wall, head down, you can always use the wall to kick up, but make sure that your spine stays in a neutral space. But if I don't have a wall, I won't be doing that. If I don't have a wall, let's say I'm doing this L-shaped variation, then I take one leg, see if my support is steady, and maybe start to use the head to take this leg off the wall. And then eventually they both meet. And if you work on your core, then you would be able to slowly walk your legs in. And then slowly support yourself. And then eventually just take both legs up toward the ceiling. So either kicking toward the wall or walking up and then slowly taking the legs off the wall, or then use the core up away from the wall and then slowly start to bring the legs in toward you. And everything that we've talked here is also very important for handstand. Like at the beginning, you can also begin lying down just to establish the alignment of the body, so keeping the spine neutral. And then both arms can reach back, like you're standing, but you're not standing, you're lying down, but it's the same shape. And visualizing the lower ribs hugging in. Also, measuring from the wall to where your hands are going to go to. You already did your wrist movement / strengthening exercises or postures. And then you can also work on the L shape. I think the L shape is a great way to work on this. By the way, if you don't have a wall, you can also play with, it's like a mixture of plank and downward dog. Let me actually do it here. So, from plank, so it's again the stacking of the shoulders over the wrist, walking the feet in, but keeping the spine with the normal curvature, so try not to let the spine round or like a cow, too much back bend. So keeping the natural curves of the spine. And then because you're stacking the shoulders over the wrist and you are walking your legs in, you're slowly putting more weight on your hands. So this is a good way to prep for also handstand. And you can float one leg off the floor. You can also do downward dog and then one leg up, and then maybe do a few kicks. But I find that for someone who's new to the practice, that gets a little bit all over the place. It's nice to stay contained when it comes to the strengthening of your muscles, stacking of your bones, and maybe using props to support height. Maybe the legs at the wall, or putting props underneath the feet so the feet come a little bit higher, as opposed to doing a lot of kicks or things that require fast movement, because when it's fast movement, if we're not connected, the body's going to go all over the place. We're going to start to find the spine moving into all sorts of shapes. So if we go back to the wall, like we did in headstand, same idea, finding that L shape, Playing with one leg this time, looking obviously at the floor. Really noticing your hands on the mat. And taking breaks. Try to hold it against the wall for as long as you can, but make sure that you take breaks. We are out of time, but I'm going to try one quickly here against the wall. So looking at the wall, I'm going to kick, but again, I have the wall, and I really want to try to keep the integrity of my spine as much as possible. Even when I land, my spine doesn't change. And you try to land with your toes so the transfer of the weight goes through the legs. And then with the wall, you can also play by looking out or down. I feel like when you have the ears next to the arms, you can keep your torso a bit more straight. The spine is easier to bring it to neutral, the curves of the spine. And then you can take a break in child's pose, maybe palms up. Thank you so much for joining me. It was a really quick inversions workshop. Have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you.